Okay, this is Q&A, guys. You're invited to ask questions, otherwise you can just sit here and meditate. Yeah.
So my questions today are just going to be on rabbinical machlokas. So first machloket is, will we build the Beit HaMikdash or it's going to be given to us by God? And does any rabbi agree that we will build the Beit HaMikdash? If so, we got to get started on it, right?
Well,
why are we going with one of the machlokets? It's a machloket. Why are we going with one answer over the other? Is to not build it.
I'm not aware that anybody,
Oh, really?
I didn't say anything yet. I'm not aware that anybody thinks there's no mitzvah to build it. Because I know everyone agrees that there is a mitzvah to build it. The question is, what's going to happen? We have to follow the mitzvos that are in the Shulchan Aruch. And if the mitzvah is to build it, we'll have to set about building it. Will we finish it? Will we succeed? Will it come down from heaven and inspire that? There are opinions about that in the Gemara. Some take it as a possibility, some take it perhaps as a certainty, but that doesn't free us from the mitzvah. The question only is, what's the definition of the mitzvah? Who is commanded? Is each and every Jew commanded to build a temple? Is it command on the Jewish people to build a temple? If it's the command of the Jewish people, which leadership and which organization determines when and how to do it? Is it a mitzvah for which you have to risk your life to build a temple? There's a reasonable probability of a loss of life in trying to build a temple. Do you then have to do it? Probably not. There are really very few mitzvahs for which you have to risk your life. And although there's a great deal of exaggeration in the corrupt politics of the Middle East, when Trump moved the American embassy to Jerusalem, there was going to be a worldwide world war over it. And nothing happened. Nothing. Zero. Not a match was struck. Absolute zero. So the pronouncements that you have are wildly. But if we tried to build the temple on the Temple Mount, that could lead to some serious consequences, and Jews could be killed. That's a very strong reason not to do it. We're not commanded to sacrifice our lives to build the temple. So there are a lot of factors that are playing a role here. Sacrifices, according to many in the present time, couldn't be offered anyway, because the Kohen who's going to offer them has to have his uniform, the priestly garments, and the priestly garments have as one of their ingredients tchelis, and there certainly is no agreement that we have rediscovered tchelis, which means there are no garments, which means the Kohanim cannot do the service, which means there can't be sacrifices. So that's another thing that has to be done. So a lot of factors here, a lot of features here. It's not just a question, let's build the building. We want to build the building in order to do the mitzvos that are attached to the building. If you can't do the mitzvos that are attached to the building, then the building is pointless.
Well, I parse Stu's question as we have actually organizations that do talks about building. There's one organization that actually creates the garments of the Kohen Gadol with what they believe is as close as you can get to knit. But we're going to stop the offerings for blue dye. I'm asking you this now. Is that a reason to stop the offerings?
Man, oh man, Yeshivat, why are you asking that question? You make it sound like it's inconceivable. I'm shocked at you. Because Baruch Hu gave instructions and said, this is how it has to be done. If you can't follow the instructions, of course you don't do it. Of course you don't do it. That's surprising and shocking and needing some kind of special justification. Of course, if he gave you the rules and you can't follow them, you don't do it. That's ABCs. Yeah.
Did you say that that's a consistent rule across the board, that if you can't follow something according to the fullest letter of the law, you should follow that out?
You put in a word that I didn't use, didn't you? You put in fullest. Right. Yeah, it's just a piece of advice in having a discussion about something. If a person takes a position and you answer him and you use vocabulary different from his, there's some suspicion that we aren't talking the same language and aren't making the same points. It's a matter of self-consciousness that when you change the vocabulary, so there are different kinds of rules, actually. There are rules which are necessary for the outcome, and the rules which are recommended and ideal for the outcome but not necessary. And that classification is made explicitly in the law. So, of course, I was talking about one of the rules that's necessary, not one of that's just recommended or ideal. But the priestly garments are necessary. And if you don't have the tcheles, you don't have the priestly garments. So that's
So
cute.
what would you say about tzitzis?
What about tzitzis?
When you don't have the tefillas?
So the Mishnah in Menachos says all white tzitzis are kosher and all blue tzitzis are kosher. They're just not ideal. It says explicitly that having blue and white in the tzitzis is only ideal, not necessary. Yeah.
With regard to the oral Torah, what are the arguments that suggest that it's true and indeed also given from God? Maybe the Rav can also give sources.
Yeah, sure. I'm glad we're scheduled to be here till 11:30, so we have plenty of time for that. There are a lot of different aspects to the validity of the oral law. I'll just mention two briefly, but I have a lot of recorded material that I have that talks about the subject. Number one, you have to realize that the written Torah could not possibly stand on its own without an oral supplement. The book cannot be read and cannot be understood without an oral supplement, which means there never was the written book without an oral supplement. Never. Some people have this picture, somebody wrote a book and 300 years later people said, oh, how do we interpret that? Or how should we apply that? It's dead wrong. First of all, in the verses of the Torah itself, it says that Moses wrote the book at the end of his life. So the first 40 years in the wilderness, all they had was oral. It was what he taught them for 40 years. And the book was composed at the end of his life, number one. Number two, there are many passages in the book which can't be understood without some kind of definitions which aren't given. Maybe the most famous explicit example, famous, people don't know, in Deuteronomy 12:21, where the Torah says, we have a temple, and you're used to offering in the wilderness, offering your animals as sacrifice in the temple and eating your portion and so forth and so on. You're going to go into the land of Israel. It's pretty big. The temple's going to be in one place. So the tabernacle's going to be in one place, and you may be 200 miles away. Suppose you want to have a barbecue. Can you do that? Or have to make a trek. Every time you want to have a barbecue, go to where the temple is and offer it as a sacrifice. What's the story? Can we do it or can't we do it? So the Torah says, yeah, you could do it, just make sure that you sacrificed it the way I commanded you to. So the reader says, oh, okay, we have to follow the rules for sacrificing animals. Where are the rules? Maybe they're in the book of Isaiah? Maybe they're in a book of Job? Oh, I'll bet they're tucked away in the Leviticus where... No, there are no rules anywhere. No hint anywhere how you slaughter animals. So Rashi on the spot says, clearly, the person who heard those words spoken had other information available to him where he could say, oh yeah, I remember the lessons we had. We had classes on that. And now we're being told, make sure to follow those things we had in the oral lessons 25 years ago before these verses came into existence, before the book was written down. There are many cases. Don't do malacha on Shabbos. What is malacha? No clue. No clue.
How do we know it's this version?
1 second. We're doing one thing at a time. I know you have 25 questions, and I told you I'm going to answer 2. I'm not going to do more than that because it'll take hours and hours and hours. Talking about the fact that the oral tradition isn't hundreds of years later commentary on the written, which was made up later. Talking about the fact that there must have been standard information into which it was set. Malacha on Shabbos carries the death penalty. You're a judge. We found this guy signing his name. What do you do? Did he violate or not? How do you know? What's the definition of malacha? There's no definition. Just don't do malacha. It says 20 times don't do malacha, but doesn't tell you what malacha is. So you'll be hamstrung if that's it. Bind the words on your arm. Now, how do you bind words on your arm? If you know a little philosophy, words are abstract, they're not physical at all. So you can't bind them on your arm. Maybe I should write them on a strip of plastic and wrap the strip of plastic around my arm? Tattoo them on my arm? What am I supposed to do? No clue. No clue. You're not going to get leather straps and leather boxes and parchments and a bird's feather for a quill and so forth. You're not going to get that. So there's a gigantic, and it's also true in the narrative portions. It says when Moses was born, his mother saw that he was good. She hid him for 3 months, and then she couldn't hide him anymore. Why not? She hid him for 3 months. He was good. What's wrong? You can study the text from now till doomsday. You could have 1.4 billion Chinese studying the text, and you'll get absolutely no information. We know the story because the oral tradition preserves it. The Egyptians were told to kill newborn children, particularly newborn babies, boys, and they kept track of pregnancies, and they knew when she was about to give birth, but she gave birth early. He was a 6-month baby. So for 3 months, they're not going to come to check. After 3 months, they're going to come to check. So then they're going to be found. That's when she had to put him in the ark of the, in the teva at the sea. But without that, you wouldn't know. There are hundreds of places where without some given oral supplement, you could not possibly understand the text. That means that oral supplement was always there. And if it was always there, and Moses wrote the book at the end of his life, then it means it came from Moses. They didn't have several different people making up Torahs as things went around. So a lot of this material goes back to Moses. It's exactly the same origin as the written, and it has the same authority as the written. No difference whatsoever. That's number one. Number two, when you talk about the transmission of this information from generation to generation, which some people want to say is similar perhaps to a telephone game. You know how telephone is played, or if you come from Britain, it's Chinese whispers, which is, of course, culturally totally inappropriate, right? And making fun of the Chinese, but that was when things were a little looser. And you have 10 people, and you repeat the thing down, and by the time you get to the 10th person, it's utterly unlike what the first person had. And here you have the first official text of what we call the oral tradition was 1,500 years after Sinai. It was the Mishnah. So 1,500 years of telephone. Why should you think what you got in 1,500 years later was similar to what you had there? So the comparison, you'll forgive me for being brutal, is stupid. First of all, telephone is communicated through whispers. You can't whisper a Z and you can't whisper a V, and the message always has Z's and V's in it. Number two, you play it after the third martini. It's hardly serious. Number three, you only get to whisper once. When the number one whispers to number two can't say, I think I heard you say this. Did I get it right? Or, sort of check whether he's getting it right or not. No, that's not allowed. He's got to whisper to the next guy, right? Here you have a culture which makes as a top priority preserving and understanding and applying information. From the very beginning, you have a national talent search for the people who are best at this, and they are inducted level by level into the highest courts, and they're given the greatest honor, and the greatest glory, and the greatest authority, the greatest admiration. So people are going to want to be very good at this in order to accomplish this. Furthermore, you have multiple schools all preserving this information and communicating with one another to cross-check whether the information is correct. This is really a telephone chain. And if all of that, I would say all that information should at least show you have a burden of proof to me to show that it's been inaccurate. I don't have to show that it's been accurate. You have to show that there's reason to think it's inaccurate. And then I would say to you, if you take the body of information in the tradition and ask, how much of it is controversial and how much of it is universally accepted, the controversial area may be 4%. And 96% is universally accepted. And if that's the case, that means the transmission is very good. You have empirical evidence that overwhelmingly tells you the transmission is otherwise. It ought to all break down. Take a little simple comparison. Christianity, which is much younger than we are, we're 3,300 years old. They're about 2,000 years old. Christianity has broken up into hundreds of different sects with wildly different understanding of the original information of the religion. I once had a student here who said, Rabbi, you're making a big mistake. I said, why? Because it's over 1,000 different sects. Well, gotcha. Okay, it's over 1,000. Got it. I put it on the table. No problem. If you look at what they believe, the differences between, let's say, a Unitarian and a Catholic are from one extreme to another extreme. You have nothing like that within the Jewish tradition. Now, I just used a word, but I have to warn you about it, and then I'm stopping and going to somebody else. When you talk about differences between different Jewish groups versus different Christian groups, Muslim groups, Buddhist groups, Hindu groups, Shinto groups, Taoist groups, Confucianist groups, there's a big difference. The only religion in the world that has a reform movement is Judaism. The only religion in the world that knows its origins, knows where it came from, knows who its founders are, and groups say, we know better. Moses didn't eat pigs. Poor Moses. He just didn't know about trichinosis. He didn't know about boiling the meat. We know better than him. We know now that it's okay, so forth and so on. They know their founders and they turn against them. No Buddhist does that. No Hindu does that. No Christian thinks he's holier than Jay. No Muslim thinks that he's a bigger prophet than Muhammad. They don't do that. So we're talking about those who are within their tradition, who pledge allegiance to the origins of the tradition and want to live according to that origin. And their loss of information is spectacular compared to our preservation of information. So I think we have a great deal of empirical evidence that our preservation of the information is very accurate. Not perfect. We forgot things. We did misunderstand things, and they're recorded in the Talmud, and the reasons for the mistakes are recorded, and the way to deal with the fact that we now are doubtful about information is recorded in the Talmud explicitly, but overwhelmingly we have an accurate transmission. Those are two of the questions that are asked about the oral tradition. 2 of the 25 that could be asked, but I'm not, and that's all I'm going to do for that. Yeah, who's next?
So we have a question? Oh, I had another machloket question. Do we say bracha on non-kosher food if we have to eat it or not? The whole issue with the pig. We've been now given the pig to eat because we're in the desert, we have to eat. Do we say bracha or not?
I don't know.
Rabbi Gottleib, Rabbi Madeline said that's a big machloket. So
Okay.
No issue. I'll ask.
Okay, I mean, but
In essence.
I'm not sure what kind of question is being asked. One of the things I used to teach as an example of how science works when I was in university was the Einstein-Bohr debates, which is about quantum mechanics. And
Jewish science.
No. I have something to say, actually.
Sorry.
That's why you're sitting here and listening to me. Otherwise, you could be doing something else, right? And I would try to give a description of what Einstein held, what Bohr held, and what they were arguing about. And the students would inevitably ask me, who's right? And I would say, who are you asking? You're asking me? Who's right between Einstein and Bohr? 2 gigantic revolving geniuses, I just hope to enrich my life a little bit by learning a little bit about what they were talking about. Well, if they were geniuses, so our people are bigger geniuses. So you're asking me who's right in this rabbinic debate? I'm not going to even think in those terms. I want to learn a little bit about what this one said and what that one said, and enrich my understanding of the tradition as a whole by knowing that there are these positions available. But to take a side in the matter, it's just unless you're the greatest scholar of the generation, it's nonsensical. It's nonsensical. Yeah.
In many, say, Eastern traditions, there's a tremendous emphasis based on things such as being present and ego dissolution. Does Judaism value that at all? And if not,
I didn't quite get the first one. In many what kind of traditions?
in many Eastern traditions.
Oh yeah, being what?
Zen and Taoism, being fully present to your experiences. And
Fully present?
yes,
Oh, yes, I've heard about that.
as well as
Be in the present moment, right?
You also said ego.
as well as stuff such as ego dissolution.
Well, that's okay. But those are 2 different things. Now, perhaps you know this better than I do, and you can explain to me why I have it wrong. I've seen Western psychologists take this up also. There was a thing called transactional analysis. Eric Byrne wrote a book called Games People Play. In the end of the book, he had this idea of being in the present moment. Okay, I want to ask you 2 possibilities, and tell me which one is in the present, which one isn't, and how should it be done and shouldn't be done. Guy's driving. He's in New Hampshire, and it's late September, and the leaves are all the different colors and he's driving, looking at the leaves and looking at the changing of the colors and experiencing the mood of the fall and anticipating winter and so forth and so on. That's one example. Okay, here's another example. It's just late September in New Hampshire. He's driving the road to the courthouse because he's standing on trial for his life, and he's preparing his defense in his mind. What shall I say? He doesn't see the trees, doesn't see the fall, doesn't anticipate winter. He's thinking about what arguments he should use in the courthouse. Is he less in the present moment? Is he not living the present moment in the same way? He's somehow out of touch in some way? Seems to me, if he's on trial for his life, he's really in touch, because in 3 hours he's going to be on trial for his life. So why would the color of the leaves be more living in the present moment than preparing his defense for defending his life? Why?
Well, first off, like you said, in 3 hours he would be trial for his life. So if he was sitting and contemplating that, for instance, there's a Buddha saying, when I eat, I eat, when I sleep, I sleep. It's about engaging in whatever your body is engaged in and not being in 2 different places at once.
But my body isn't engaged in presenting my mind is engaged.
Right.
My body's driving the car. So should I really be only in touch with driving the car? Something wrong with thinking about how I'm going to defend myself on a life and death thing?
Not so much that something is wrong with doing that, just it's seen as a very high value to just be present to driving the car.
So again, in other words, I'm sacrificing a very high value by preparing my defense?
In a sense, yes.
Well, I think that's nuts. Excuse me. I think that's nuts. It seems to me that my present is I'm on trial for my life. That's my present. It's not just a physical car that's my present. It's really my present that I'm going to defend my life. It's also part of my present. Why would the physical present be more important than the psychological, logical, legal, medical present?
Well, would you agree with me that the best way to prepare for a trial where you're on trial for your life is by not driving and thinking about it, by setting aside time and sitting and thinking about it?
He has to get to the courthouse. He's driving there. God, that's silly, right? I mean, we're not talking about whether you drive a car, whether you don't drive a car. The point is, he's driving the car. That's how he's getting there. He's being driven. He's in handcuffs, okay? But he can look out the window. That's not what the issue is about. The issue is about why the physical surroundings is called, given this laudatory description of being in the present moment, and the psychological, the legal, the medical parts of his life aren't given that credit. Why is this called being in the present moment? His medical condition is his present moment. His legal condition is his present moment, just isn't physical. But why would the physical take precedence over the other aspects of his present moment?
Because in the first one, there's a kind of resonance with where his body and mind is, and in the second one, there's dissonance.
I don't hear that. I don't hear that. His mind, he may be resident with his hips on the seat. That's right. But he's out of resonance with the fact that he's going to be on trial for his life. And that's also part of where he is, part of what he is, part of what's going on in his life at this time. Why would the physical surrounding be more important than the other? You can make it more important, you can declare it more important, but it has no appeal now. The appeal of the words is you're escaping, you're just not dealing with reality, you're escaping to something else. And that person doesn't want to live in fantasy, he wants to be in touch with reality. But he has a legal reality in addition to his physical reality. And you're telling me that it's more valuable in some way to be in touch with the physical reality rather than the legal reality. I don't hear any reason for that. You may not need a reason. You want to represent Buddhism, you can. But the way it was presented was, even you as an American who's not a Buddhist should hear that something's being sacrificed here. And I don't hear it.
Well, they would say that both the leaves and say the potential prison, trial, are both examples of a reality that's fundamentally an illusion. And so the best way to work through that reality is to be present to it.
Why isn't the car an illusion? Why isn't I sitting on the seat? So why should I be attracted to that illusion?
Because the best way to work through the illusion is by being present to what you're experiencing and seeing through it, not by being distracted or
I'm experiencing my defense for the trial. I'm experiencing that, just not with my eyes and my ears and my buttocks. I'm experiencing it. Why isn't that being in touch with my experience?
because that's a dissonance of what your body's actually experiencing.
I don't only experience with my body, I experience with my mind.
Right.
My mind also is experience.
But you could rein the mind in.
You can what?
You could rein the mind into your physical experience, but you can't transport the body to the courthouse.
So what? Who needs the body? I'm telling you, what my experience, when I think about mathematics, I'm experiencing thought. That's also an experience. Not just fingertips on the table is experience. When working on a mathematical problem is also experience. So why isn't working at the mathematical problem also being in touch with my present experience?
Well, when you set aside time to do that, it absolutely is.
So then, fine. So that means that up until this moment, you were defending the physical against everything else. Now it seems to me you've taken a corner, and I congratulate you. I think it's a good corner to take, that the physical has no more priority than anything else, which is really relevant. If he's fantasizing about being president of the United States, and which is never going to happen, and which is not that might be an escape. But prioritizing the physical, and this is what Eric Byrne did, and the other people who have been affected by Buddhism seem to prioritize the physical. And I think that from my point of view, again, if you want to claim the authority of Buddhism, I have no complaints about that. Pledge allegiance and do what you like. But if you're trying to appeal to me, point out to me that in my own terms, my own understanding, I should realize that I'm sacrificing something, I don't get it. And no one's ever been able to explain. And I have friends who are Buddhists. I have a brother who dabbled in these things also, and no one's been able to explain it in a way that makes sense, that somehow being in touch with your buttocks against the seat is more than being in touch with defending yourself at the trial. or thinking of solving a mathematical problem. I don't see it. If you agree with me on that, then I think that progress has been made. Other questions? Yeah.
My question is about the Yeshivat Ohr Somayach.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of struggle with it because sometimes in life we have when we take like a challenge, so we really need to be all in on it.
Must be what?
Really all in and do like
Yeah.
a huge effort, and then saying no, it's not me. All thanks to so kind of like it's really go one against and just lately very famous Israeli politician also mentioned something about the Holocaust of one woman also. Just
Give me a break. All right. I have a lot of respect for him, but he stepped out of his role. Look, let me give you an example of the way I explain this, and maybe this will help. IBM is advertising for a new position of programmers, and what they're doing is they're offering to take 100 very top people and test them for a week. And the top 10 who do the best on the test will be hired by them for this new project. So they get these 100 people and they sit them in front of computers and say, you have to design a program to do this. Find the least common denominator, or find solve the fundamental theorem of arithmetic, where you find unique prime multiplications for every number, or whatever it is. And they're working on these, and then when they write a program and they run it, and they run diagnostics on it, and they try tests, and then the tests come back bad, and they have to fix it, and they go through this for a whole week, right? At the end of the week, 10 people are chosen, report to the IBM Monday morning at 9 o'clock. They all report at Monday morning at 9 o'clock. And these 10 guys, their programs worked, so they feel that they really, were successful in the testing. They get there at 9 o'clock, and the IBM representative says, first thing I want to tell you is, none of your programs worked. What do you mean? We tested them. You were hooked up to one of our senior programmers. They gave you back false results every time because they wanted to see what you would do with this kind of result. None of your programs worked. The problem is much too difficult, and none of you solved it. But you were the best at responding to the false information you were given. Now, how do you feel now? Gee, and I thought I wrote a program that worked. I was so proud of that. On the other hand, I did very well. I'm hired and the other 90 weren't. Did I try as hard as I could? I did. Did I get hired? I did. I just didn't create the program. Does it really matter when you're putting out your effort whether you alone produce the result? Does that really matter? What if you knew that you're making your effort, and the result is always a gift? It's always a gift from the outside.
Why would they do that in the first place?
Because you won't get the gift if you don't make a great effort.
So
He wants you to make an effort. He rewards effort. But you didn't make the outcome. If you know you're going to be rewarded for your effort, wouldn't you put in maximum effort? I think you would. I think you would. You don't have to be in control. This is part of a much larger piece of philosophy. But you don't need to be in control in order to even be responsible, in a sense, for the outcome. If I know that somebody's watching me, somebody is in control of the outcome, and he has certain principles. He chose those principles. He applies them because of his own choice. He could change them if he wants. And I do the things which interact with his principles so that he chooses to give me the outcome. But I know that my grasp of his principles is pretty good. I know statistically that almost always, when I meet the principles in a certain way, that's the response that I get. I'm not making the response, he's giving it to me. It's his power, not mine, and he could change it if he wanted to. I just know that typically he doesn't change it. Maybe let's say 1% of the time he does, but typically he doesn't. So then, if a certain outcome is a good outcome, and I act in such a way as according to his principles he gives me the good outcome, then it seems to me that I'm responsible for the outcome happening, even though I didn't cause it to happen. And if I interact with his principles in such a way as to the principles dictate a bad outcome, I'm responsible for the bad outcome also. Even though I didn't control it, even though I don't have power over it. Because I know empirically, I know through experience that when I interact these ways, this is the result that I get. It's my ability to predict the outcome, which makes me responsible, not my control and causation of the outcome. That's not necessary to be responsible. Yeah. Fine. Ja, was noch, gang? Yeah. You have another question? Another, I'll go back to him.
Not that great.
Okay. Yeah.
So my next question is about the issue of tshuva. So I'll try to ask it in two ways. So, for example, a secular Jew that didn't met the right rabbi, just didn't get the message along his lifespan, or Tinok Shenishma that also wasn't exposed. So is necessarily each Jew have have the opportunity to make tshuva? Because one can spend his life without the opportunity and just end it the way it started.
Yes, that's true. No, I don't think there's any. I don't know of any source that says that every Jew has the opportunity to do tshuva. I don't know of any source that would say that.
So it's possible that you can spend his life and not knowing that he's not finished by in a more radical case, that not knowing that he's a Jew and that live it like that.
That's right. Now, if you have the principle of reincarnation, which many of our sources do, though not all, then you have an easy answer to that, because what you call his life is only one chapter in a much longer biography with, let's say, 30 chapters, when that soul was in the world 30 times, and you don't know what happened before and you don't know what happened afterwards. So that particular life may be part of it's a chapter in the development of a soul, and it has antecedents and consequence, which makes sense when you see the whole picture, which you don't see here. So I think that's an easy way to realize you don't have enough grasp of the situation to evaluate it. But if you and I must tell you, this is only my own speculation, but the Rambam, who I've spent a certain amount of time learning, he has certain positions which would be greatly helped out if he had reincarnation. Now, Rasad Gaon, who lived about 100 years before him, explicitly writes against reincarnation. The Rambam knew Rasad Gaon, knew his writings. The Rambam never mentions it, positively or negatively. The Rambam is not shy. He takes lots of positions on lots and lots of things. He says certain Talmudic traditions he disagrees with because he thinks other Talmudic traditions contradict them. He was famous for saying that Shadim are not real. Right? Why doesn't he take a position? It was a known factor. Rasad Gaon said it. He never says anything for or against. I'm very suspicious about that. He thinks that children are of no moral account. That suffering doesn't count. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to worry about it. Even though, of course, legally, anyone who kills a child is a murderer and will die for it. But that they suffer, the children suffer to punish their parents. But the fact that the children are suffering, morally speaking, that's very hard to understand. He never raises the question, never even concerns himself with it. So I'm suspicious that behind it all, he's not saying everything that he knows. I think that's true anyway, because of the way he writes in all of his Sfarim, he's not saying everything that he knows. And maybe he doesn't raise the question because he has an answer, but he doesn't want to share the answer, for whatever reason. If not, I don't know what to say. But so if you're talking about someone who never gets a chance, if that's only one chapter in a 30 chapter book, of course, there's no conclusion to draw from that. Yeah, you guys are just listening to the show? Okay. Yeah, you had another question?
I'll ask one question.
Yeah.
It's for what do you think is the Jew's biggest obstacle in today's world?
I'll tell you, different people are different. I think different people have different obstacles. I don't think you can reduce all of our psychology to one. But there is a group of great authorities who think that technology is the big obstacle today.
AI. All of it.
No, smartphones. AI is a joke. It's not intelligence at all. It's not a kind of intelligence. There's no intelligence there. There's no understanding there. But that's a whole philosophical thing. I tried GPT with, I tried GPT. How did I do it? Because it was stopped with collecting information in 2021. That's its information set. Okay, but I know things that no one else knows because I made them up. I made up questions and I figured out the answers. So I know it doesn't have it in its data set. So if I ask them the question, I'm getting its reasoning. And it was awful. Awful. Just awful. It tried to make analogies and contradicted itself and said things that were clearly stupid. I mean, it was just awful. So I'm testing it to see whether there's any understanding there. No understanding there at all. There's word association based on gigantic amount of data of linguistic data, but in terms of reasoning, it's really zero. So, but the actual technology and the implications of technology are subtle. It's not just the obvious things that, like schmutz or misinformation about religion or that sort of thing. I don't know, you can look this up on ancient history. The guy was a guy from Canada named Marshall McLuhan. And a guy from Canada named Marshall McLuhan. You can Google him. And he was famous for a number of things, but one of his sayings became very famous, which is the medium is the message. Sometimes the biggest impact is not what the medium conveys, but the very fact that the medium exists. Right? The importance of the telephone is not that you could communicate nuclear physics on it, it's that everybody's using one all the time. That's the important fact. That's the fact with impact. The idea, for example, of social media where people's own self-image, their own self-respect is based on likes and dislikes and friends. I want to know, from how many of those friends can you borrow $100? Right. How many of those friends are going to lose sleep over the fact that you have a problem? Mm-hmm. Answer is -6. It reduces the quality of human relationships has gotten much worse because we're so connected in so superficial a way. How much can you condense into one Twitter or one X? It was 128, 145 characters. That's your message? Years ago, I read about the fact that English majors don't read books. They get Google summaries of books. They don't read the books. Their subject is English literature, and they don't read the books. That's a tragedy. I come from a period of time when we did read books, and there's something really amazing about reading a book from cover to cover, going through the experience of the gradual development of an idea or gradual development. I don't remember what book it is. Well, people who are watching this certainly know better than I, but there's a book in which you have a scene described where a rich guy is sitting in his study, and he's sitting in an easy chair, and it's afternoon, and he has a book in his lap, but his eyes are closed. He must have fallen asleep, must be dozing. And the author describes the volumes on the shelves and the different eras from which they come, and the carpet. And he says, and the sun is going down, and the angle of the sunlight is going up, and then it goes down. And then after 20 pages, he says, oh, and look at that, there's a fly buzzing around the room. And it lands on his nose. The fly is on his nose. All of a sudden you realize, he's dead. Oh, he's dead. Wow. After reading that for a half hour, and the books, and the sunrise, and the carpet, and he's so peaceful, because he's dead. That's art. That's art. You can't get that by Googling and spending 30 seconds on the page. You can't get that. You can't get it from a video. My first wife said something very interesting. There's a certain depth in black and white photography that you don't have in color photography. Because in a black and white picture, you have to put in the colors. You know that's grass, you know that's sky, you know that's sun. So you know but you have to provide the colors for the picture. So you are creatively involved in the picture. That brings you into the story in a way that getting everything presented to you doesn't. And old books that didn't have any pictures at all. So you were making the pictures in your mind all the time. But that meant the experience of the story was a much richer experience. There are a lot of subtle things going on here. People are so impatient, because, they expect an instantaneous. In 1999, they speculated about the new millennium, talking about attitudes towards computers. I interviewed a lot of men and a lot of women, and they said men's and women's attitudes towards computers are generally fundamentally different. You can hear two men talking. I got a new chip. My old chip did a million actions per second. This one does 10 million actions per second. What do you think of that? I ask him, what outcome on the screen can you use to determine whether it's 1 million or 10 million?
No.
Because it comes up in 20 nanoseconds rather than 22 nanoseconds. You can see the difference? No, but mine does 10 million. Right? They ask the women, they say, listen, I have a job to do, and this machine will do the job, so it's nice to have. Story, end of story. They look at it functionally, and for men it's a status symbol, and the awe of the technology, and so it takes on a whole different picture. Social media mean I can't live without it. Without that feedback, without that interaction, I'm dead. Wow. That's a real change. Bullying, cyberbullying, and people commit suicide. Kids commit suicide. So deep changes are taking place, and it's, how shall I say, I have a son who works in this. When the printing press was invented, no one dreamt that it would lead to a division in Christianity. Because up until then, the priests were the only people who could read and write. And they had all the books, and therefore they could tell you what to do. Now, all of a sudden, everybody could have books. And if everybody could have books, everybody could have the information. And literacy shot up, and then some people said, I don't know, I'm reading the same book the priest is talking about. I don't see it that way. And all of a sudden, room for Protestant Christianity opened up. Did anybody predict that the printing press would do that? Nobody predicted that. So I don't think we can predict the effect that technology will have. And one of the reasons that I'm so adamant, I taught computer science for a few years, and I taught philosophy of mathematics and philosophy of science, so I know something about these areas. The idea of treating the interaction that you have with the computers, treating it as intelligence, I think is extremely dangerous. You can look this up on Google also, ELIZA. ELIZA was, in the 70s, a computer program which was presented as a psychotherapist. And you could communicate with psychotherapists through a computer. You would type in the questions, and the computer would give ELIZA's answers. Well, ELIZA was a simple word association program. Hello, I'm George. Oh, George, tell me about your father. Oh, my father was, and now tell me about your mother. Did you have siblings? This is all pre-programmed questions and so forth and so on. Well, do you remember your father often? Bring him into the present. It was all pre-programmed stuff. People who used it claimed that ELIZA understood them better than their own human psychotherapists. Well, there's a double lesson there. What were they getting from the psychotherapists? The psychotherapist was probably writing his Newsweek paper. Yeah, your father. Maybe that's what they were getting from the psychotherapist. But number two, something which is, in those days, the 70s, was primitive, and you could relate to it as if it really understood you. I think that's extremely dangerous, because it doesn't understand you. And it's going to make mistakes. And you can be sucked into those mistakes. That's why I strongly object to calling it artificial intelligence, because I think, well, there's biological intelligence, artificial intelligence. All intelligence, and when you talk to it, it's talking back to you and it understands and so forth and so on, when none of that is true. It's not true technologically, and it's not true philosophically. And I think that's a big danger, that these machines will replace real human relationships, robots. They already have in Japan robots taking care of the elderly.
Taking what?
Taking care of the elderly.
Taking care of them, yeah.
Because they can smile to them and they can say things in a nice tone of voice. And these are elderly people who may not have family and who have, and the robot's there all the time. Doesn't get tired, doesn't get irritable. Robots there is, sort of like having pets. Pets are also dangerous. They did a study in California. What's his name? Dennis Prager did this experiment. He went to high schools and he asked the students, "You're in a rowboat. You're out in the water, and in the rowboat there are two others with you. One is a person whom you don't know, and the other is your dog. And the rowboat goes over, and you can save one of them. Which one are you going to save, the person or your dog?" 50% said the dog. And when asked why, they answered, "I love my dog. I don't know the person.
You don't know the person?
He's a stranger.
Oh.
Right? So I'll save my dog." That means they've lost what it means to be human. There's a whole argument now called human exceptionalism. Are we really qualitatively different from everything else or not? And if you represent evolution and the rest, you want human beings to be not fundamentally different, not qualitatively different, just another animal. Indeed, a friend of mine did a PhD, his wife did a PhD at the University of Toronto in psychology, and it was dealing with animals. And the required terminology, this was 30 years ago, required terminology is human animal and non-human animal. But you have to say animal, because you're just another animal. Right? And that's such nonsense. You're going to tell me that the difference between a chimpanzee and a hippopotamus is equal to the difference between a human being and a chimpanzee? Really? Just think of what you're talking about. Make a list of the relevant features and tell me why that difference is comparable in any way. So then you have this nonsense that their genes are 98% the same as our genes, so they can't be very different from us. First of all, you could have said, they're obviously different, aren't they? So therefore you don't understand how the genes work, which happens to be part of the solution, because the regulatory genes where one mutation, a regulatory gene, could change 100 different gene operations down the line. That's one problem. Number two, they only looked at 4% of the genes when they made the comparison, because the rest is supposed to be junk, and it isn't junk, it turns out to be functional. They made a lot of mistakes. But when you weigh it up, am I supposed to discard literature and gigantic technology and adaptation to habitats all over the world, which no chimpanzees do, and poetry and language and the rest of culture, and understanding how the stars burn and shine and all the rest of that, and say, well, it's just a little extra, but we're really just fancy chimpanzees? Why would you be convinced of that? You really have to be blinded by an atrocious ideology to be convinced by something like that. You're just turning your back on the obvious facts. So I'm very much against this sort of thing. It spills over into other things as well. What do babies experience? So you see a baby do something, and then subconsciously you project yourself into the baby and say, if I did that, what would I be experiencing? And that's what made the baby must be experiencing. And you do with animals also. But it's just wrong. It's just a mistake to do that. One final example. There's a fellow, I think he may be even still, Hillary Putnam was a great professor of philosophy at Harvard. He did great work in my area as well. He did work in a lot of areas. He was tremendously. And he asked the following simple question: do dogs have a concept of meat? So even I was taking it. Dogs reliably identify meat. They don't mistake pebbles for meat, and they don't mistake rubber balls for meat, and they eat it and they enjoy it. I guess so. So he said, consider the following parable. A steakhouse opens up in your neighborhood, and they offer half price for a while, the introduction, you go, great stuff. After 3 months, there's an investigation, expose. It was all soy. It was all soy. No meat there at all. They doctored it so the texture was like meat, and the smell, the aroma was like meat, and the taste was like meat. It's all soy. And the government's requiring them to give money back. If you can prove that you were there, they'll give you your money back, and so on and so on. Fine. Now tell me, could a dog understand that?
No.
If to the dog the taste was meat taste, and if the aroma was meat aroma, and the texture was meat texture, that's all there is. That's not a concept of meat. The concept of meat is something that grew in an animal, or is cloned from cells that grew in an animal. That's what meat is. Meat isn't just the sensory signs of meat. Meat is something that grew in an animal. A dog doesn't understand that. A dog can't understand that. So the dog does not have the concept of meat. And if you think he did, then you're taking the fact that he deals with meat and you're projecting yourself and saying, well, if I dealt with meat that way, wouldn't I be using my concept? Yeah, so the dog must have the concept. That's just wrong. Don't project yourself in. Don't multiply what it does by your own capabilities. Just look for the minimal description of what it is to explain what it does. There was another story. I'm told now that it wasn't really true, but it illustrates the same thing. There's a wasp called the digger wasp, and what it does is it kills spiders, digs a hole, buries them, and when it's hungry, it comes back and eats them. Now, the following experiment was supposed to be, so people said, well, they're preparing for the future, you know. That's certainly intelligence, even in the world of the wasps, which is considered to be very primitive and so on and so on. It's already a sign of intelligence. Okay, so they're supposed to have done the following experiment. The wasp kills the spider, drags it up to a certain place, and starts digging. While he's digging, the experimenter pulls the spider away. Pulls the spider away. So the wasp stops digging, goes and gets the spider, pulls it up, and starts digging. So the experimenter pulls the spider away. You know the end of the story? It keeps going back and forth till it drops dead of hunger. Oh, was it planning for the future when it was hungry? Then why didn't it stop digging and eat it? Because it wasn't planning for the future when it would be hungry. It's hardwired. You kill it, bury it. That's what you do. You'll die burying it? Bury it. That's the next thing to do. It's wired into that's not intelligence. That's a hardwired behavior, which happens to be beneficial under most circumstances when there aren't experimenters around. When there are experimenters around, it turns out to be fatal. So this is the kind of thing where you take a small slice of behavior, and then you project yourself into it, and you attribute to the baby, the spider, the wasp, the chimpanzee, your capacities in doing it, when that's certainly impossible. The inappropriate, the language. Oh, the chimpanzees are really reciting Shakespeare, and the porpoises are squeaking Shakespeare to one another, and the language, they don't have the same vocal cords we have, so they can't make the same sounds, but it's still there. When they did further experiments and further tests, it all fell apart. It all fell apart. So this kind of inflated interpretation of what's going on in the name of evolution, because then we're all on the same rank. We're all on the same line. You can explain how we got to where we are from chimpanzees, because after all, we're very close in the evolutionary tree, and we're just a little bit above them, so it's not hard to explain how we got from here to here, right? But if they're here and we're there, it's much harder to explain. By the way, there's a wonderful book called Not a Chimp by Jeremy Taylor, put out by Oxford. It's a little old now, but he goes through the genetics of it, and he goes through the behavior of it, and he has a wonderful chapter on crows. Turns out that crows are very smart. Crows can solve certain problems that chimpanzees can't.
Yes.
So, well, but they're not close to us on the evolutionary tree. So how could that be if it's all dependent on the genes? Yeah, it just doesn't work. That's all. Sorry. So you want to get a review as of 15 years ago of all the relevant evidence. A very, very thorough book. The guy's a first class. He makes scientific documentaries, and he wrote a book on this called Not a Chimp. It's a very, very enlightening book. Okay, guys.